guys, it's Stephen Blesson with the Social Grain. My guest today is someone that I've had just so much respect for and love for over the years. She's taught me a ton professionally and personally. A lot of it I still use to this day. So I've known her. I don't know. It's probably been 15 or so years, I think, that I've known her. And honestly, she's one of the most passionate people that I know, one of the most charismatic people that I know. And she can be quoted as saying, "I love, love, love to bake." I'm pretty sure I got the number of loves right. So because of that, I'm pumped for this conversation because she's got such a strong passion in general for things that she latches onto, but specifically baking is what we're going to talk about today. So let me just go ahead and introduce my good friend, Laurie. Thank you for joining me today, Laurie.
Hi, thank you.
So let's get into questions, and I'll start here because I think it's a really good spot to start with a lot of folks. Can you just tell me about your family story? If I understand correctly, your family's Palestinian. Um,
Correct.
so can you talk to me about some of that story and how that's brought you to where you and your family are today?
Yeah, so my dad's family, my dad's family. My dad was born just outside of Tel Aviv. My dad's family is Christian Palestinian. My grandfather was born in what is now Jordan, but back then, at the time, it was Palestine. And so my family moved here, they immigrated here in the 70s. And my father met my mother here in Michigan. I live in Michigan. And so our family has really been in and around the Flint area, and we live in Detroit, well, close to Detroit now, suburb of Detroit. But the majority of my family is still, we're kind of split. There's a lot of family here in Michigan and Flint area, and then there is quite a bit of family in the greater Toronto area. So not too far away, about 4 hours. So.
Okay, good. Well, thank you for that. What so you are a tremendous baker. I see just based on pictures, based on pictures,
I
everything
only
looks
see the
good.
good stuff.
That's right.
I
You
only
only post
post
the
the
good
good
stuff.
things.
You only post the
Yes.
good stuff. That's the way to do it. Um, what got you into baking, and is any of that influenced by your family or some of that journey that they've gone through?
Well, okay. So this is kind of embarrassing. And it's just more recently what's gotten me into baking. This is so embarrassing. I can't even believe I'm admitting this. It's a Great British Baking Show. Have you seen that TV show? I love it. I love it. And I don't know if you know, new season starting this Friday. I cannot wait. But I started watching it. So I've always liked to cook and bake, but I've never done it regularly.
Right.
And I started watching that show, and for some reason I was like, oh my God, I'm going to bake everything because it's so fun. Right. And I've had some success, and I've had some things that are not so great that we have to throw away. Brent might eat it. I'll eat some of it. But a lot of times it has to just go in the garbage if it doesn't turn out very well. But it is definitely a process. What I like so much about it is that it is a process. It's like a science experiment every single time. But that's kind of what got me into it. And I would say got me into doing it on a regular basis. I've always really enjoyed doing anything in the kitchen whatsoever. That definitely comes from my family, both sides of my family. But my dad's family, because food is like family meals and having people over is just so much a part of that culture that it's just one of the things that I've always loved to do because of that.
Right. But then the Great British Baking Show got you into baking.
I know, it's so ridiculous.
So
have you watched the show though?
I have not. Can you really quick?
Oh
Let's take a couple seconds. Can you tell me what is the Great British Baking Show? I think you've told me about this before, but
okay. So I think it's 12 bakers, and they go and they bake in a tent, and they're in this tent, and they give them every week it's a different challenge, and it's like, so then like the first week is usually cake week or cookie week or biscuit week or what they call biscuits. And they have a signature challenge where they say, okay, make me your best cookie. And then they'll have a technical challenge where it's you have to make they give you a recipe, but they don't give you all the instructions or all the measurements or something. And they have to do that. And it's always one of the judges' recipes. And so then they tell them what to do. And then they go back and then you see the judges like showing you what it should look like. And then at the end of the technical, then you see all 12 bakers what they made. Just usually doesn't, very rarely does it turn out to be what like
Right.
the judges show
Yeah,
them. And then the
of
judges
course.
blind score them. And then they have then they have their showstopper. That's the end. And so
Okay.
then they usually have to make some type of big masterpiece each week. And then they get judged each week. And they're not typically judged based on, oh, you did really well last week. You didn't do so great this week. It's did you do good enough this week to get through? And they're all so nice
Right.
and I love the show. Sometimes I will admit I have a hard time understanding some of the people, but it makes it even better for me. I
Yes.
love it. I love it. It's my favorite. It's my favorite show.
Yes.
Well, aside from maybe Downton Abbey, but
There you go. There you go. All the British shows.
I like them a lot.
Oh man. So you mentioned something before we went down this tangent of the Great British Baking Show. You mentioned something that kind of caught my interest, right? As you said that what got you into baking recently or more seriously into it is obviously the show and like just learning.
Yeah.
And I think that's tremendous, right? Is that you find something and you become passionate about it and you run with it. But you also mentioned that from an early age that cooking in general was heavy in your life or your
Yeah.
family's life. Can you talk to me a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So our family has always been like when we were younger and we would go over to my grandparents' house, like they were watching us or whatever. My grandma didn't cook for her and my grandpa that were living in the house. She cooked for the entire family.
Mhm.
And so when they would make, let's say spinach pies, for example, where they'll make the dough and then they make the filling, and they wouldn't make like 20 spinach pies. They'd make like 500 to 700 spinach pies in a day. So it's like this whole day long. That's what they were doing that day. And every day was different. So today was spinach pies. Tomorrow might be just something different, whatever that might be. A lot of times it was what was in season. My grandfather had a very large garden.
Okay.
And so when they made the spinach pies, for example, it was with the spinach harvested from his garden, the onions from his garden. And then to make the pies, people would come over and help. So people would come over and help, people would come over and eat. So it was this whole process, but it was also this very, very social thing and delicious. So
Yeah.
it was just it was always fun. So to go over to my grandparents' house and see what was being baked or made or cooked that day. So whether it was spinach pies, it was bread, we're making grape leaves or stuffed squash. Just depending on the day, it was always different, always delicious, and then always social every
Yeah.
time.
Do you have a favorite of anything that they would cook like that?
My favorite has always been grape leaves.
Okay.
That I know those aren't baked, but I of the baked goods, I think probably spinach pies are my favorite. So yeah, there's a lot. I mean, there's so many that are so good though. I'm probably forgetting what I haven't had a lot of it in a while. So
Right.
it's
And the grape leaves are filled with something, right?
yeah. So there's stuffed grape leaves. So
Okay.
what they call it heshwe, which
Okay.
is a rice and meat mixture. Usually it can be lamb, could be beef, just depends on your taste. When I make it at home here, I make it with lamb.
Okay.
But or I'm sorry, I make it with beef. I want to say my
Okay.
grandmother you typically made it with lamb. And it has different spices. So like allspice, cinnamon, salt, pepper, a little bit of nutmeg sometimes if you want to add that. And then oil. And then you basically take that and you roll up the grape leaf and then you put it in a pot and then you fill the pot with water and then you let it cook and then they're delicious. Put some
Yeah.
lemon on it. And it's funny too with the grape leaves. And I think maybe this is why I like the grape leaves too, is my grandparents. I remember even my grandma, and my aunts would come over to our house, to my parents' house in Lapeer, and they would pick grape leaves from off the side of the road, just like stop and pick grape leaves, and then we would
Really?
eat them later. Yeah, and so when we moved into our new house here, on our driveway we have a fence, and
Uh,
it's all grape leaves, and I was like, oh look, I could pick some grape leaves to make for
wow,
dinner.
that worked out.
Yeah, it did.
Yeah.
It
So you just
did.
find random grape leaves along the side of the street, and you can make stuffed grape leaves.
Yeah, no, my aunt, they would pull over to
Yeah.
stop and pick grape leaves on the side of the road.
Wow.
Yeah,
That's cool though. I mean that
good
works out.
stuff.
That works out.
Hmm.
So the grape leaves, is and I love grape leaves from I mean the few times I've had it. And actually coincidentally, the best ones I had was over in Greece in the Mediterranean area, right?
Hmm.
So I think it makes sense.
Yeah.
Um, but it is when you think about you started to mention this a little bit, baking breads and some of the baking and things like that. Do you recall any specifically like any fresh breads growing up from what your grandmother or grandfather or anybody would make?
Yeah. Well, pita bread,
Pita bread.
right? So
Okay.
what you would know is pita bread. Yeah.
Okay.
And so they they made it quite a bit. Like even my dad would make it sometimes at home. But what I remember about it is that, when they made it, it's always large batches of bread. And so pita bread, when you make it, you have to, you make the dough, and obviously you have to let it rise or proof. And
Mhm.
it, then they would break it down. Like, so once it does its initial proofing, then you break it down and you make like little discs. But the way my family did it to keep it warm was they would put it, like they'd have, like, it would be the entire dining room table. And this is a dining room table for like 8, 10 people, big dining
Right.
room table. The whole table would be full, and it would be a blanket. And then they'd have the bread would sit like each individual loaf under, like on top of a blanket, and then put another blanket on top of that to keep them very, very warm. And so that they would raise again. Then you put them in an extremely hot oven, and then they puff up, and that creates the pocket, right? The pita pocket.
Oh,
But
okay.
yeah, so there'd be blankets all over the house with bread in them when my grandma would make pita bread, laying, it could be on the floor, it could be on the table, but blankets
And
everywhere.
those blankets probably have to sit for what, a couple hours or so, right?
Um, it depends on how warm it is outside, and
Okay.
it depends
Okay.
on the temperature in the house and the
Right.
humidity. Just depends on the day. I mean, when I first made, I tried to do it on my own, which is probably a mistake. I should have went over to my family's house and had them help me. Mine, I didn't let them raise enough. I didn't know exactly what I was doing, and they're like hockey pucks. They were really hard. I'm like, okay, well, those are something that went in the garbage. But I finally figured out how to do it, and and it's different every single time I've done it. It just depends on the humidity in the house
Really?
to get that puff. Yeah.
Wow. So if the temperature changes a little tiny bit, then you gotta completely change your process.
Mhm.
A
Yeah,
week of
or
time.
if you change your ingredients a little bit, it could change different kind of flour, you know,
Right. Right.
different kind of yeast.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, I guess talking about that, is it basically just flour, water, salt, yeast that goes into the pita
That's
bread?
it.
That's it.
Then sometimes I put a little bit of oil, like
Right.
when you make the initial batch
Yeah.
on the outside while it's raising, I put and then put a moist towel over
Hmm.
top, and then let that raise up. Once that does, then you break it down into little pieces, and then you let that raise as well. Like
Yeah.
after that, yeah. And the
So that
blankets, I use the blankets too now, just because that's the way I've seen it done.
that's good. It works. So that the ingredients for that, it's something that I've I've latched on to, right? And I was talking to my wife a
Mhm.
little bit ago, and she was saying that she's like, every single one of your interviews you talk about this. Like, I am just straight up intrigued by that bread is just made out of the same ingredients, no matter where you are. It's made out
Yep.
of some kind of flour, some kind of rising agent, water, salt, like, and that's it. Like that's it. Just the way that you make it, the way you form it, how you cook it, what kind of flour, like those things change. But for the most part, like it's all the same ingredients, right?
Hmm.
Which to me, this is why I've kind of gotten into this whole thing. It's mind blowing. It's mind blowing to me. Um,
Well, it's a whole. chemical process every single time, and the different ways you make it, it turns into something completely different. You could have a
Yeah.
regular loaf of bread, you could have a pita bread, you could have a non bread. I mean,
Right.
and there's very slight differences in what you're doing with the ingredients. And that's why I think it's so cool. And it's like, again, sometimes it doesn't turn out if you don't know what you're doing.
Right.
But
Right. Do you have, and maybe it is pita, but do you have a favorite thing to bake, whether it's bread or a sweet or anything?
no, I don't.
Just
So
everything.
well, you know what it is? It's like I do have some things that that look, so I baked it and it turned out really, really good. So I make
Right.
those again.
Okay.
Either one because I like them or somebody else really likes them. I love to bake for other people. Not so, I mean, I like to eat it myself, but I don't want to like make a whole cheesecake and then sit here and
Right.
I'm eating an entire cheesecake.
Right.
Um, but I like to try new things or I see things and I say, oh, that might be good. So a lot of times what I do is I write down different recipes. I tweak different things. Like I made oatmeal cookies last weekend, but
Mhm.
I changed the recipe just a little bit and they turned out delicious. So when I find a recipe and I do that and I really like the way it turns out, then I write that down and I'm like, okay, this is a recipe I'll use if I want to make these cookies again. But if I don't like the way it turned out, then I don't write the recipe down or I have to try it again and tweak it.
Right.
So it just I like to try new things is really what
Okay.
it's about. So it's like I just what are we gonna do this weekend? Custard tarts. Okay, cool.
So you're very experimental with with your
I mean,
baking.
I'm a pretty novice baker, to be
Sounds
honest with you.
like.
Like, I love it. I love
Right.
it, but
Right.
it's like I said. I mean, there's been a lot of stuff that's had to go right in the garbage.
Yeah.
It's not
Right.
gonna. It's
I've
not good.
I still I mean, even with this whole bread journey, like I still end up throwing half of our loaves of bread away when they turn out like crap. But
Yeah, no, it's
it's the
crazy.
way it's the way it goes. It's the way it goes.
It's fun though. It's a whole process, and I don't ever feel like I wasted time. Maybe I wasted some money if I bought some more expensive ingredients,
Right.
but I always enjoy the process no matter what.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think that hits home for me. I'm sure it's home for a lot of the listeners and watchers, because I don't necessarily think that we'll attract the professional bakers as much as like the person that just picked up baking a year ago or something.
Yeah.
So I think that that's good. That's good. Um, so besides some of like the stuff you talked about already, like the
Mm.
blankets over the pita bread and the baskets and baskets of spinach and making spinach pies, what's a memory, what's like a fond memory that you still go back to, like even when you just smell something that comes from what one of your family members would cook, or when you go to cook something and you think of, this is how my grandmother would make it or my grandfather or anything like that. Like what's one memory that you can think of that you still hold on to?
Oh, that's a really good question. Because there's a lot I think that are like that, just depending on again our whole all of our family functions when we were younger. And this is specifically on my dad's side, but this does apply to my mother's side too.
Hmm.
Um, there it was a lot of it was centered around food. And it was the food that was in season and what they were cooking. So depending on the day, you'd come in and you'd be like, oh, today we have baklava, or today we're making, some whatever dish it might be. Um, I know one, trying to think of a specific memory that I have, but I think it's probably more so when my dad, who doesn't really cook all that much because he didn't really, I mean, didn't need to because my grandma was always just making stuff for everybody. But it would be like that day we would come home from school and you would smell fresh bread in the house because my dad decided to make bread. Like, and it'd be maybe once a year, but it
Right.
was really, really good. The way his bread is really, really fluffy. It's different than what my grandma made. My
Okay.
grandma's was a little bit thinner. And we loved it. And then he would make it and then he would give it away to people. Um, So that was always exciting, come, oh, we got bread, and then there'd be blankets all over the house.
Right.
Still,
Right.
that's really all I can think of. I mean, but for the most part, it's definitely, oh, walking in like, oh, what does that smell? What is it this time? Like, what are we eating? Because it was never the same depending on the season.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes sense. I think that's definitely a good memory, to
Yeah.
hold on to, especially like you get the sensory of it, the smell. You walk in the house and you can just smell something different based on what the season is, or what's going on, or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So that's good. That's good. So you've talked about a lot of the foods that you've mentioned, and tell me if this is incorrect or not. But it sounds like a lot of what especially in Michigan, what we would call Mediterranean food, right? You go to Mediterranean
Mm-hmm.
restaurants, is basically what you grew up on, right? Is the
Yes.
traditional foods of your family, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that
Yeah.
that makes sense.
So the Middle Eastern, it's really the Palestinian diet essentially is what you would find in any, like, I mean, some very similar to anything you'd find in a Lebanese restaurant.
Mhm.
It's a lot of grilled meat, vegetables, fresh food, colorful food.
Yeah.
So when we have dinner, I always get so excited if my plate is very colorful. I love to have a colorful plate for dinner. And I never knew that was a thing until like I Googled it and I'm like, oh, there's a bunch of people that think like this is
Right.
really
Right.
getting excited about colorful food. Um, but yeah, I mean, the Mediterranean diet is super healthy. And that's always been one of the things, like I look back at my grandparents and the way that when my grandpa was alive, like when he was making, like he would garden everything. I mean, we ate out of the garden. I took that for granted, I think, because he would tell me, oh, come on, I have tomatoes. And I'm like, I'm going to drive an hour to Flint for tomatoes. I'll just go to the grocery store. Oh my God. I would drive 10 hours right now for tomatoes.
Yes.
Fresh, because we used to eat. I mean, he'd go out to the garden, he'd get tomatoes, cucumbers, onion, anything that you wanted, and we would have it fresh right there. And nothing to this day, nothing tastes as good as those salads have tasted to me. And so but I'm also a huge fan of salads, very, very
Yeah.
colorful salads.
Yeah. Yeah. That's good. The fresh garden picked fruits and
Mm-hmm.
vegetables. That's the way to go. That is,
Yeah.
you can't beat it. You can't beat it. Well, Laurie, I appreciate your time. I really do. I don't have any other questions. I think that you've given tremendous insight into your family and into your passion for baking and cooking in general, and the Great British Baking Show. So I definitely appreciate that. I think that the listeners will get a lot out of this, 30-minute or so conversation, just even just hearing the passion in your voice, and understanding, this is what you've done, what you've grown up with. So thank you for joining me this evening.
Thanks for having me. This is really fun. I
Yeah,
love talking about food. It's my favorite
exactly.
subject.
Right, right. There is no better subject. There's no better
Nope.
subject. Well, thank you, Laurie, and thank you, everybody watching and listening. We'll talk to everybody a little later. Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Bye.